Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Wednesday Leading Change episode, this week with Tomo Lennox. Hi Tomo, welcome back.
Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. So on Wednesdays, we dive into those things called change processes, things that happen over time that lead to a transformation or a change. It can be a personal change, it can be an organizational change, it can be a team change, but we're always involved with change as Scrum Masters. So share with us a story of one of those processes, Tomo, and then walk us through the process as it happened and highlight the tools, the tips, the tricks, the techniques you learned back then that you still apply today.
Sure. So I said before that I have a lot of background in lean. And I think if you cross the lean and the agile, you get a much richer development environment that you can do separately. One of the things that I like to put in is a board. You look at those pictures of Scrum meetings back from way back in the early 90s, whatever, and they have boards with Post-its and strings and things like that on them. But you look at teams now, and the Scrum guide doesn't say you have to have a board, and a lot of people haven't tried to put a board up. And so that's one of the things that I start change with, is to say, let's get a board. And they say, well, okay. And there's I'm a coach now, and you try not to force anything on people, but I push a little bit to get a board up. Once you get a board, you can start to see the flow. You can start to put the little age on the cards. You say, why has this one been sitting there 7 days? What do you mean 7 days? Oh yeah, I noticed now. The feedback you get from a board is transformative for teams. So one of the things I always try to get the teams to do is to get a board up, and then we can start talking about WIP limits. We can start talking about, when you start the sprint, do you do everything in progress at once, or can you let them sit there in the sprint backlog and do Kanban, pull them out one at a time, and have some WIP concepts? And I've had wonderful luck improving teams' metrics and happiness that way.
So I'm sure we will dive into the many conversations we can start from a board in a minute. But let's start from the beginning. And you said, sometimes I need to push a little to get a board up. And I understand we will always get some kind of resistance at some point. And of course, the more we push, the more resistance we get. That's a natural process in change. But what have you learned, the tips that you can share with us about introducing that board in a way that the team doesn't, outright reject it?
So when I first engage a team, and as I said, now I'm an agile coach, so I end up getting new teams all the time. The first thing I do is sit and listen and try not to say a word until they're used to me being there and I'm not threatening. And then I ask a few mild questions, and I make sure that I spend enough time that I understand the team first before I tell them anything. And then I answer questions when they answer them. But when I think I've kind of got the team down and I understand, where their weaknesses are, the general one I tend to go for is I say, hey, I've got this great idea for you guys. If you're willing, I want to show you something cool. And if I've built the right relationship, they'll give it a try. And I say, you don't need to keep this, but if you feel like trying it, I'd be glad to show this to you. And usually after they've had it a week or two, they love it. They never go back. At least once or now and then, a team will say, no, we don't like this board thing. We're going back to our list. But almost always they like the board. And then we can start, showing them the feedback they get from it.
So you said a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. So first, sit and listen. Of course, that's a very important super skill that Scrum Masters have, right? To listen to what's being said and also to what's not being said, like how the relationships work and so on. Pay attention to that. And that helps create a sense of acceptance, right? So first, acceptance from us that this is what the team is. Like, I think the key phrase is like meeting them where they are, right? So like understanding how the relationships work, who listens to who who drives the decision making, who is more silent, who is more talkative, like understanding that, because that influences who we talk to, who we speak to as well. And you said something that I want to explore a little bit further. By sitting and listening, you said, my goal is to understand the teams first before suggesting anything. What do you mean by that?
That's right, because I always have my favorite toolkit of solutions, and I am just ready on day one to say, here, do this, do this, do this, do this. But that's not a servant leader, right? And that's not what's gonna endear me to them. And so first, I just want to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And usually I find smart people who are doing smart things for good reasons. They may not be perfect, but they usually have pretty good reasons for what they're doing. And me understanding that is really important. Otherwise, I'll say something contradictory and muck up the whole thing.
Yeah, and that gives us the ability to do something which is to amplify what they are already doing, because in every team there will be great things that they are already doing. So instead of us coming in and pointing what's wrong, which, as you said, is not a very good way to endear ourselves to them, but we can start by amplifying, by highlighting what's already great in that team.
I had a team just a little while ago, and they had 4 teams, and they had one joint stand-up that was really a rush job to my mind. And I thought, oh, this is wrong. You got to split this up into separate, every team gets their own stand-up. But as I listened to what they're doing, they had a real cross-team communication problem, which they had solved by joining their stand-ups. It wasn't ideal, but it solved the problem, and it really, really worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And once we start to amplify those things, then we can find what we think is a good solution that is already in place. Like for me, as you said, we always have a favorite toolkit of solutions. I mean, this podcast is called the Toolbox exactly because of that. We have lots of tools in our toolbox that we want to, and perhaps are even excited to implement in the teams we work with. But if we start by listening, we can find the tools we like that they are already using. So it's not us pushing, it's just us highlighting how well that works.
Yeah, and you don't muck up the things that are working. Work on something that's broken.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing that I think this gives us as an ability is to come in and start asking questions about how have you solved X and Y and Z, right? Because sometimes they will have solved it, and other times they will think, you're right. We haven't thought about that yet. And then we can ask, oh, cool. So what would you do? Right? So I think that that perspective that you shared of sitting, listening, understanding, and then finding, the smart people who are already doing smart things, as you put it, gives us a lot of leverage when introducing change in that particular team.
But you really have to bite your tongue for a little while, because you really want to just shout stuff out.
So what's your rule of thumb? For how long do you bite your tongue before you start contributing?
So I would say it's probably a week, but more importantly, it's after they start asking me questions. If they start asking me questions, then the relationship is started. And until they do that, I have to go kind of slow.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great tip. When teams start asking questions, that's when the relationship has started. That's a very good tip to end this episode. Thank you very much, Tomo.
It's been great to be here. Thank you.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.